Episode number 6. That spring, whenever possible, Kay usually spent his evenings after work. He usually stayed in the office until 9 o'clock, with a short walk, either by himself, or in the company of some of the bank officials, and then he would go into a pub, where he would sit at the regulars table with mostly older men until 11. There were, however, also exceptions to this habit. Times, for instance, when Kay was invited by the bank's manager, whom he greatly respected for his industry and trustworthiness, to go with him for a ride in his car, or to eat dinner with him at his large house. Kay would also go, once a week, to see a girl called Elsa, who worked as a waitress in a wine bar through the night until late in the morning. During the daytime she received visitors, while still in bed. That evening, though, the day had passed quickly with a lot of hard work, and met respectful and friendly birthday greetings. Kay wanted to go straight home. Each time he had a small break from the day's work he considered, without knowing exactly what he had in mind, that Mrs. Gaubach's flat seemed to have been put into great disarray by the events of that morning, and that it was up to him to put it back into order. Once order had been restored, every trace of those events would have been erased, and everything would take its previous course once more. In particular, there was nothing to fear from the 3 bank officials. They had immersed themselves back into their paperwork, and there was no alteration to be seen in them. Kay had called each of them, separately or all together, into his office that day for no other reason than to observe them. He was always satisfied, and had always been able to let them go again. At 9:30 that evening, when he arrived back in front of the building where he lived, he met a young lad in the doorway, who was standing there, his legs apart, and smoking a pipe. "Who are you?" immediately asked Kay, bringing his face close to the lad's, as it was hard to see in the half-light of the landing. "I'm the landlord's son, sir," answered the lad, taking the pipe from his mouth, and stepping to one side. "The landlord's son?" asked Kay, and impatiently knocked on the ground with his stick. "Did you want anything, sir? Would you like me to fetch my father?" "No, no," said Kay. There was something forgiving in his voice, as if the boy had harmed him in some way, and he was excusing him. "It's all right," he said then, and went on, but before going up the stairs he turned round once more. He could have gone directly to his room, but as he wanted to speak with Mrs. Gaubach he went straight to her door, and knocked. She was sat at the table with a knitted stocking, and a pile of old stockings in front of her. Kay apologized, a little embarrassed at coming so late, but Mrs. Gaubach was very friendly, and did not want to hear an apology. She was always ready to speak to him. He knew very well that he was her best, and her favorite tenant. Kay looked round the room. It looked exactly as it usually did. The breakfast dishes, which had been on the table by the window that morning, had already been cleared away. A woman's hands will do many things when no one's looking, he thought. He might himself have smashed all the dishes on the spot, but certainly would not have been able to cut it all out. He looked at Mrs. Gaubach with some gratitude. "Why are you working so late?" he asked. They were now both sitting at the table, and Kay now and then sunk his hands into the pile of stockings. "There's a lot of work to do," she said. "During the day I belong to the tenants. If I'm to sort out my own things there are only the evenings left to me. I fear I may have caused you some exceptional work today." "How do you mean, Mr. Kay?" she asked, becoming more interested, and leaving her work in her lap. "I mean the men who were here this morning." "Oh, I see," she said, and went peacefully back to what she was doing. "That was no trouble, not especially." Kay looked on in silence as she took up the knitted stocking once more. "She seems surprised at my mentioning it," he thought. "She seems to think it's improper for me to mention it. All the more important for me to do so. An old woman is the only person I can speak about it with." "But it must have caused some work for you," he said then. "But it won't happen again." "No, it can't happen again," she agreed, and smiled at Kay in a way that was almost pained. "Do you mean that seriously?" asked Kay. "Yes," she said, more gently. But the important thing is you mustn't take it too hard. There are so many awful things happening in the world. As you're being so honest with me, Mr. K, I can admit to you that I listened to a little of what was going on from behind the door, and that those two policemen told me one or two things as well. It's all to do with your happiness, and that's something that's quite close to my heart, perhaps more than it should be, as I am, after all, only your landlady. Anyway, so I heard one or two things, but I can't really say that it's about anything very serious. No. You have been arrested, but it's not in the same way as when they arrest a thief. If you're arrested in the same way as a thief, then it's bad, but an arrest like this, it seems to me that it's something very complicated. Forgive me if I'm saying something stupid, something very complicated that I don't understand, but something that you don't really need to understand anyway.